For centuries, the Catholic Church has been one of the most powerful institutions in the world, shaping nations, influencing kings, and guiding the fate of billions. Its towering cathedrals, sacred rituals, and deep traditions paint a picture of divine order and spiritual guidance. But what if I told you that beneath this grand image lies a history filled with secrets, conspiracies, and dark moments that changed the world forever? There were times when the church held more power than empires, influencing wars, controlling knowledge, and even deciding who lived and who perished. From forbidden texts locked away in the Vatican archives to the chilling trials of the Inquisition, from political schemes that altered the course of history to scandals that shook the faith of millions, the true story of the Catholic Church is far more complex than most people realize. What if some of the greatest mysteries of the past were deliberately hidden from the public? What if key events in history were orchestrated from the shadows by religious leaders with their own agendas? And most importantly, how much of what we know today has been carefully rewritten to fit a particular narrative? If you're ready to uncover the shocking truth behind the hidden past of the Catholic Church, make sure to watch this video until the end. Before we start, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to support us. Now that you have subscribed and liked the video, let's dive deep into history and uncover what was never meant to be told. If the Catholic Church had not made some of the controversial decisions it did throughout history, the world, as we know it, could have been vastly different. Imagine a world without the Church's influence in shaping empires, laws, and even science. What if the Church had never launched the Inquisition, or if its vast wealth and political power hadn't played such a key role in world events? These decisions didn't just affect the lives of those in power. They impacted the lives of millions, shaping entire cultures, governments, and even wars. The consequences of these choices continue to ripple through history, and in many ways, we're still living with the outcomes today. One of the most pivotal moments in the history of the Catholic Church occurred during the Middle Ages, when the Church held not only spiritual authority, but also political and economic power that rivaled the might of kings and emperors. This period saw the Church play a central role in shaping the very fabric of European society. But what most people don't realize is just how deeply the Church's power affected the rulers of the time. Kings, queens, and emperors were often forced to seek the approval of the Pope, for without his blessing, their rule could easily be undermined. This relationship between church and state was one of mutual dependence, but also of manipulation and control. During this time, the Church had a hand in almost every major decision made by European rulers. For instance, when kings sought to expand their territories or launch wars, it wasn't just their military strategies they relied on. Their success often hinged on the Pope's endorsement. The Pope could grant or deny what was known as the Crusaders' indulgence, a powerful decree that promised absolution for sins in exchange for participation in wars deemed holy by the Church. This gave the Church not only immense political leverage, but also control over the lives and destinies of entire nations. But this power didn't come without its darker side. The influence the Church held over kings often meant that decisions were made not for the greater good, but for the preservation of power and influence. The Church would support or even orchestrate military campaigns and crusades that were less about religion and more about securing land, wealth, and power. The manipulation of religious ideals to justify political ambitions left a trail of destruction and bloodshed that is still felt to this day. And behind the scenes, the wealth of the Church was staggering. The Vatican amassed riches through donations, land acquisitions, and even a collection of taxes from peasants. This wealth fueled the Church's influence over the elite and its ability to shape history, but it also led to extreme corruption. The pursuit of power and wealth within the Church led to a series of scandalous practices, such as the sale of indulgences, that left many questioning the very foundation of Catholic doctrine and practice. This combination of religious authority, political power, and unchecked wealth set the stage for one of the most tumultuous and controversial periods in the history of the Catholic Church, one that would eventually lead to Reformation, as reformers began to push back against the Church's growing corruption and the hypocrisy of its leaders. One of the most infamous chapters in the history of the Catholic Church is undoubtedly the Inquisition, a series of trials and investigations that were aimed at rooting out heresy, but which instead led to widespread fear, torture, and death. Established in the early 13th century, the Inquisition's primary mission was to protect the faith by identifying and punishing those who were deemed to be threats to church doctrine. But what started as a religious effort to maintain orthodoxy quickly morphed into one of the darkest episodes in Christian history. At its peak, the Inquisition targeted people from all walks of life. Anyone could be accused of heresy, often without any tangible evidence. Suspicion alone was enough to bring someone under scrutiny. Accusations were frequently based on personal vendettas, social status, or even religious differences. Once an individual was accused, the methods used to extract confessions were brutal and terrifying. Torture was not only permitted but encouraged. The Church, with the approval of the papacy, sanctioned horrific methods, including the use of iron maidens, the breaking wheel, and burning at the stake. Tools designed not just to punish, but to instill a fear that would deter others from questioning church teachings. But the true scale of the Inquisition is often hard to grasp. While the exact number of people executed remains a matter of debate, estimates suggest that thousands of men, women, and children perished under the church's scrutiny. The inquisitors, often with the blessing of secular authorities, ruthlessly hunted down anyone suspected of witchcraft, blasphemy, or even simple dissent. The horrors didn't just stop at executions. Entire communities were uprooted, families torn apart, and a climate of fear was instilled that lasted for centuries. As the Inquisition spread across Europe, its reach extended far beyond the borders of Italy. In Spain, the infamous Spanish Inquisition became a tool of both religious and political control, targeting not only supposed heretics, but also Jews and Muslims who had converted to Christianity. Inquisitors often used the power of torture to force confessions from individuals, sometimes condemning them for crimes they never committed. Even more terrifying was the fact that many were punished for simply questioning church teachings, an act that would have been considered unthinkable in a society where the church's authority was absolute. The Inquisition's impact on European society was far-reaching. It crushed intellectual curiosity, stifled free thought, and fostered a culture of fear that prevented people from questioning the prevailing religious narrative. For centuries, the Inquisition stood as a reminder of what could happen when unchecked religious power was allowed to dominate. The aftermath of the Inquisition didn't just affect the lives of those who suffered under it. It left a legacy of mistrust and suspicion that still lingers in many parts of the world today. The Church's role in the Inquisition remains a contentious subject, and despite later attempts at reconciliation, the shadow of this dark period continues to haunt its legacy. What began as an effort to preserve the sanctity of the faith became a ruthless campaign of persecution that left scars on the soul of Europe and on the conscience of the Church itself. Another dark and controversial chapter in the history of the Catholic Church was the sale of indulgences, a practice that sparked one of the most significant religious revolutions in history, the Protestant Reformation. Indulgences were originally introduced by the Church as a way for believers to atone for their sins and reduce their time in purgatory through acts of charity and penance. However, by the late Middle Ages, this practice had been twisted into a financial transaction that allowed people to buy their way out of sin. The Church, in its growing need for wealth and power, began selling indulgences as a means of raising funds for various projects, including construction of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The sale of indulgences became an institutionalized system where the rich could essentially purchase forgiveness, while the poor were left with little hope of salvation unless they could afford to pay. The practice became widespread, and many within the Church saw it as a way to line their pockets. The more indulgences sold, the greater the revenue generated for the Church, creating a system that preyed on the fear and desperation of the faithful. This corrupt practice reached its zenith in the early 16th century when Johann Tetzel, a Dominican friar, began selling indulgences across Germany. His infamous slogan, "As soon as a coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs," became a symbol of the greed that had infiltrated the Church. Tetzel and others like him exploited the belief in purgatory and the desperate desire for salvation, offering indulgences to absolve sins committed not only in the past, but also for future wrongdoings. The Church even began to offer indulgences for acts of charity and warfare, turning the sacred concept of redemption into a commercial enterprise. The sale of indulgences was a direct challenge to the very essence of Christian salvation, which had always emphasized personal repentance and divine grace over material wealth. As the Church grew richer, the cries of the poor grew louder, with many feeling that their faith was being exploited. It wasn't just the common people who began to question the practice, but theologians and scholars as well. One of the most famous critics was Martin Luther, a German monk whose 95 Theses in 1517 vehemently opposed the selling of indulgences. Luther's actions, driven by righteous indignation over the church's greed, ignited the spark that would set the Reformation into motion. Luther's bold declaration that the just shall live by faith and his rejection of indulgences as a means of salvation resonated with many who felt that the church had gone too far in its quest for wealth and power. The Reformation led to a massive religious schism, with many breaking away from the Catholic Church to form Protestant denominations that rejected the sale of indulgences and, in many cases, much of the Church's authority. This moment marked the beginning of a fundamental shift in Christian theology, one that placed personal faith and Scripture above the hierarchical structure of the Church. The fallout from the indulgence scandal was immense. Not only did it lead to the splintering of Christianity into different factions, but also forced the Catholic Church to eventually reform some of its more corrupt practices. The Council of Trent, convened in the mid-16th century, sought to address many of the issues that had been raised by reformers like Luther. While the Church officially condemned the sale of indulgences, the damage had already been done, and the faith of many believers had been permanently shaken. The sale of indulgences was a clear example of the Church's growing corruption during the medieval period. What began as a means of spiritual salvation was perverted into a system of exploitation that not only harmed the faithful, but also led to one of the most important religious movements in history. The Reformation would forever change the relationship between the Church and its followers, and the legacy of the indulgence controversy remains a critical lesson in the dangers of unchecked religious power and greed. As we've uncovered today, the history of the Catholic Church is far from simple or solely focused on faith. Beneath its grandiose history, marked by beautiful cathedrals and profound spiritual teachings, lies a darker side shaped by political power struggles, greed, and manipulation. From the ruthless actions of the Inquisition to the sale of indulgences that shook the very foundation of Christian belief, these moments in history have left deep scars on the Church and on the world. They serve as a stark reminder of what can happen when institutions of immense power are allowed to operate without accountability, and when faith is used as a tool for control and profit. But despite the darkness of these chapters, the story of the Catholic Church is also one of resilience, transformation, and eventual reform. Over time, the Church has acknowledged many of its mistakes and has been forced to change, though the legacy of these moments still shapes the way we understand religion, power, and authority today. The questions raised by these dark periods about morality, justice, and the relationship between church and state are just as relevant now as they were centuries ago. So, the next time you look at the Catholic Church or any other powerful institution, ask yourself, what are the hidden stories that remain untold? What truths have been buried? And what lessons can we learn from history to ensure we don't repeat the mistakes of the past? The journey through history might be unsettling at times, but it's essential if we are to truly understand the forces that have shaped our world. If you found this exploration of the Church's dark past eye-opening, don't forget to like this video and share with others who may want to learn more about these untold stories. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for more deep dives into history, religion, and the complex world we live in. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep uncovering the truths that lie beneath the surface.